I've been working with sweetgrass a fair bit, and you know, why do we braid sweetgrass? Our people, we say it's the hair of Mother Earth, right? But that braid has 3 strands, and for me, one of those strands is traditional knowledge, one of those strands is scientific knowledge about plants, and then there's that strand of trying to make sense of both of those.
In the times when I was young, back in the 30s, we looked at fire as a tool. My dad, he'd go back of our place on that mountain range, and he'd start little fires. They'd burn out the underbrush. And the question always come up, and I said, Dad, how come you're burning that, making a fire up there? He said, I had to clean up the area. That way the wildlife, the deer, and all the animals will have feed. And I believe in my time, I have seen the devastation that is caused by fire suppression. You can go any place in the mountains right now, and you can walk through the forest, and you're walking real quietly because you don't touch the earth no more. You're walking on needles, you're walking on all the stuff that's piled up there.
A little ground cover.
That's why today when we have a fire, it takes out the whole mountain range.
When Columbus and the Europeans came to this continent, they found bountiful resources, a great diversity of wildlife and habitats, an abundance of foods, and those products were all the result of tribal management. The natural resources have sustained tribes for millennia, been vital to their survival, the economy of the tribes, and their spiritual and cultural identity. But tribes were more than just users of natural resources. They were managers of these resources and the lands, and with a profound stewardship ethic to provide for the needs of future generations, recognizing that man and the environment are one. With European settlement, the ability of tribes to access and use natural resources has diminished. That resulted from the displacement of tribes from the landscape, the loss of the land base, restriction of tribes to small reservation boundaries, encroachment, competition, settlement, and development of natural resources has increased the scarcity and reduced the productivity of the resources, increasing conflict over limited resources and imposing upon the landscape a rather complex set of political jurisdictions. Nowhere is that more important than with fire. This is a map that just illustrates to you the different forest and woodland types and the frequency of fires. The blue areas show understory fires at 0 to 10-year intervals, and up to stand replacement fires of 500 years or more, which are indicated by the dark purple. Nearly every part of the continent was affected by fire. And nowhere is more evident the influence of Native people on the landscape.
Let the fire burn. You can trench around your home. Indian people have always built their fires camping out. They sweat, and their sweat lodge out in the mountains. I've never heard of any of our Indian people's fires going out of control. because they know how to watch it, how to take care of it, and they know which way the wind is coming. They only build early in the morning or late at night, not in the middle of the day when the weather is not right for a fire. They knew all that. When I was a child, I used to hear them discussing how to save the mountains, how to save the timber. I didn't pay much attention, but that's something Grandpa used to say. There's a meaning, there's a use for everything out there. Leave it alone, let it burn. There's a reason that it's going to burn.
I had my uncle. He'd be about 100 years old now, but he lived in Elmo, and I think every springtime he was our fire burner. He'd burn all of Elmo. By April, everything would be burned, you know. And he lived with me for quite a while, and he was sitting outside under the tree and smoking, and watching the woman across the street. She was raking her yard, and it took her 3 days to rake her yard, and Uncle John was out there every morning smoking, watching her. God, Uncle John, why don't you get out there and rake my yard? God, I didn't say nothing. The fourth day I went out there and I looked out the window and my whole yard was black. He burnt it. He burnt all my leaves and everything. And I thought, and he started sprinkling right away. I said, oh, okay. That's what you were out there, you were smoking away, watching the ground, watching Mother Earth dry up the leaves. And all, and you knew just when to start the fire so that it wouldn't go far, and he had it under control. That's what fire can do.
I've heard just a few things from my mom and stuff that she knew when she was growing up. And she said her uncles used to burn in the spring all the time. Like every spring, they burn different places around the homes and stuff. And I've also read a lot of literature about it, about the traditional uses of fire. And it's pretty, they used it for everything, for managing for hunting habitat to economic extortion is one I heard before that I thought was pretty interesting. Back when trappers were coming into areas, the Indians would go in and burn it out. So then the animals would leave. They'd momentarily leave, and then the natives would come in and trade them for like deer meat or hides that they had already had. So it's pretty interesting. You know, some of the coastal tribes, California coastal tribes, they'd manage the oak habitats and stuff so they could harvest acorns. Habitat management, you know, keeping it in earlier successional species and even grasslands. And of course that was for hunting and stuff.
When I went there, I just, you'd see people burning and not knowing traditional reasons for burning. You know, they would burn to clean up around their houses. Everybody did, every spring. They'd do it, and it cost nothing. All the members would burn, but they would burn pastures, and I assumed they were burning for many other reasons that I never knew. I came in '77 to the Colvilles and started working, and during those 30-some years, I've heard the same story Everett shared by, I believe, a different elder during one of my trips to Yakima, said the same thing, that how heartbroken they were that the forests weren't today what they used to be. They weren't as open. They were all grown in because of the suppression, that they don't, you know, it broke their heart to see that. But I mean, they were burning for many reasons, and 10 to 20,000 acres every year got burnt for free. They just did it. But in that period, the restrictions came on, and we regulated all this traditional and free burning out of existence. It was heartbreaking to me to see all these people who intuitively knew when to burn, how to burn, and there was never a problem. And then all of a sudden today, everything has to be regulated so strict and so tight that we've lost all that in just 33 years.
When I hear fuels treatment in the context of traditional ecological knowledge, I suspect you don't really mean mitigating fire hazard. I think you're talking more often about a lot of other objectives. We can treat fuels to mitigate fire hazard, and that could have nothing to do with ecology or with cultural values. So one of the key issues and concerns for fire management that I've noticed recently is not calling our management actions what they really are. I mean, my example is Kmart does a great job of fuels treatment when they pave the parking lot. There's no more fuel. They mitigated the fire hazard. In a number of cases, the Forest Service has said, well, let's take public comment on our fuels treatment plan, and the public says, we don't want any, we have insurance, you know, let it burn. And they go, oh, we didn't really mean fuels treatment, we meant restoration, we meant ecological resilience. And they said, well, you didn't say that.
My friend Carol Crow, who some of you may know, she's an Algonquin biologist. She was going to come to a sustainability conference, and she went to her elders and said, well, this is what I'm going to do. And they said to her, well, sustainable development, what is that? And so she gave them some of these definitions. And they were really quiet for a while. And then Carol responds that they said to her, continued attainment of human needs? That sounds to me like they're just trying to figure out a way to keep on taking. That's really what sustainability is in that language, a way to keep on taking. But within our traditional ways, much of what we're taught is that beneficial relationship between people and place. If we bring TEK into our thinking as a partner to Western science, restoration of relationship to land comes first. Relationships of respect and reciprocity. And rather than imposing our will on the land, the healing process is to support the natural resilience of the land and let it evolve in these changed circumstances to a new, healthy, flourishing ecosystem. And as Dennis Martinez says, this can take a really long time. He once wrote a restoration plan for degraded cut-over redwood land in Northern California, and phase 1 was 100 years.
One of the things we've heard in Indian country over and over again, and I hear it now with the state foresters bringing it up, is oftentimes Forest Service will have a, whatever, maybe it's a wilderness area or a management area that's lit burn, and the fire burns, comes out of control, and then when it reaches other ownership boundaries, does unwanted damage because the objectives were not compatible across boundaries. So that's another challenge. And the other thing I think we face a hurdle is for agencies that want to let burn, have they prepared the land to burn? Is it ready to burn, or is lit burn an easy way out because we don't have the resources to put the fire out? We're just gonna let it burn, and so the public says, okay, it's Mother Nature, when we could have put it out and not done some unnecessary damage. So preparing the land so it's ready to burn before we let it burn, I think, is gonna be real important. Because these are not the forests that elders talked about that used to burn. They're much denser, and they burn a lot hotter and cause a lot of damages.
There are two fairly old stands of ponderosa pine in the Bob Marshall Wilderness, one near Big Prairie. And as scientists, we go in there and we measure the fire return interval, and we notice that these are very unique stands, and not because there was a lot of lightning all the time there, but because there was clearly evidence of human hands igniting fires regularly around these ponderosa pine stands. And it was clear that there was annual camps there for harvesting bark and cambium, and that much of the influence of fire was by human hand, historically, over hundreds and hundreds of years. Yet, what's the problem here is that this isn't a wilderness area. And in fire research, you know, we produced this map of fire regimes and condition classes for the U.S. We always talk about the historical, natural role of fire, but all of a sudden we have this conundrum of, well, if it's human ignited, it's not natural. And how do we acknowledge the role of native ignitions in these areas, which was really about agriculture. It was about harvesting the bark every year. And it's a real conundrum for wilderness management, whether or not it literally takes an act of Congress to change the Wilderness Act to allow active management in those areas.
What we have is a system where the specific regulations are defined narrowly and compete with one another and really paralyze action, good or bad.
I know we did, when on a project we worked on, we did a lot of interviews with people, and one of the questions we talked about was air quality and problems with air quality. And it seems to be, we got to noticing them. Of course, they're stronger in certain areas with certain prevailing conditions. And I think an important thing for the agencies to look at is that there are lots of things that agencies, cities, et cetera, can do to mitigate people's concerns about air quality and still go on then and have projects.
We were from, say, 97 to 2003, logging about 20,000, 25,000 acres a year. And we harvested a little over 1 billion board feet. And it set up these conditions that were favorable for reintroduction of fire. And so it got to be down to the wire that we had to start burning pretty soon within the next few months. And we really didn't have a direction to go, except we knew that we had to start bringing in resources. And we just started making calls. We had Umatilla, Fort Hall, Warm Springs, Spokane, and the regional office all show up. And we were able to burn about 2,200 acres. Our window was short, and it was a great introduction to bringing all the several agencies within our region, within the Bureau, together to fulfill our target. We had a big sit-down meeting with everybody, and we put together just a presentation of what the stands look like, why we're doing what we're doing, what we see, what we hope to accomplish by all of this, and just lay it all out for them so that they're able to put things together and understand what we're trying to develop and create or enhance. We had briefings. It basically carried out like a type 3 incident. We had morning briefings. We had everybody going to their units. We had all our burn bosses lined out, all our overhead, and everybody knew where to go, and it all fell into place. And at the end, we had a big after-action review of, we had those daily, but we had a big one at the end to see how things went. What could be better? What did we do that was good? What could we improve upon? What did we miss out on? And so that set us up for the spring of next year, and we carried out some jackpot burning and some of our thinning slash.
There has to be a recognition that indigenous knowledge has value, because there's some lessons to be learned there. That requires a whole kind of educational intervention that sometimes many agencies are reluctant to do. What kinds of resources and people do we need to help us to understand each other better, and then to begin with some projects.
I'll throw out an example, once again, from my tribe, where we have 10 million acres of seeded and usual and accustomed land in Oregon. We had 2 excellent forest supervisors. Thought it was phenomenal that the tribe, in this case Warm Springs, reached out and co-authored a management plan for those 10 million acres. But it didn't happen overnight. Harmony sessions, which we call them, every year were held so that the federal land managers understood some of the complexities and sensitivities that the tribe had, and I thought that was a great step in the right direction so that the tribes had input on harvesting, burning, collection of cultural plants and foods, and that was key. Always improvements, areas of improvements, but that was a tremendous step in the right direction. And I know other tribes have done that as well, where they get together, sit down, and you co-author a management plan for, on federal lands that are managed, and it has worked well. So I throw that out. I think that, I think that's worked well.